So now we're going to transition to our panel discussion. And I want to start off with the question is, are issues affecting Black women in the criminal justice system being amplified enough?
Are issues affecting Black women in the criminal justice system being addressed enough? No. To answer that question, the majority of the people, I can only speak from the federal perspective, and so the majority of the people in federal prison are women who are drug offenders, and the majority of them are people of color. Like, it was shocking for me to be transported from county jail to federal prison and to be on a plane with almost 100 individuals, and the majority of them being people of color. And so being inside the federal system, I would hear personal stories, and there's not enough treatment. If people are disillusioned and thinking that people are actually being rehabilitated in prison, they are so wrong. My crime wasn't the fact that I was criminally minded. My crime was that I chose a poor boyfriend. I chose poor relationship. But as far as counseling and dealing with issues concerning Black women or people, because it's not, I can speak from the Black woman perspective, but really there were Hispanic women, Haitian women, African women. So there was a diaspora of people of color, women, and the majority of the issue for a lot of us were the relationships, whether it been when they were child, they were molested, being raped, so many issues that would lead them down the path of incarceration, and then also too the lack of opportunities. So I just think the issues that impact us the most aren't even addressed in the criminal justice system to give people a good footing once they walk out the doors. And simply the money's being put in to keep us there, but there's no money there to kind of help us mental health wise work through our situations so you can move forward.
I would also add that I'm spending a lot of time talking to and about women that are incarcerated nationally, and women in mass incarceration overall. I found through not only studies that I've done and some of the writing that I've been doing very recently, that the majority of women who are locked up generally suffer from having been abused in many different ways, whether that's sexual abuse, domestic violence, violence within the family, a number of different issues that they're facing prior to being incarcerated. There's also a lot of health disparities around women that are incarcerated as well, and how we're responding to them and their family situations in terms of their children being terminated and other things that we are also doing to women who are incarcerated. So it is a vast problem, and Kimber was right. In the short answer, we are not doing what we should be doing or looking at the things we should be looking at when women are incarcerated in the rates that they are, in the disproportionality that they are. And it's definitely disproportionate.
Talk about the impacts of children on children of incarcerated parents.
Generally, most of the studies have shown that children of incarcerated parents tend to do worse at school. They basically suffer stressors that a lot of the other children don't suffer, mainly because they suffer embarrassment about not being able to say where their parents are. There's not a lot of training that's done with teachers or administrative staff around how to actually handle children with incarcerated parents in terms of helping them explain their situation, why their parent isn't at the conference, why their parent is not taking part, why they can't see their parent. While I was at the Council on Crime and Justice, we had what we called a family strengthening project, where we tried to connect children with their parents. But even through that, children even when they visit their parents that are incarcerated, they can't act like kids. So they have to sit in a particular place. They can't act like kids. And so visits are not productive. Parents aren't even able to, in some situations, even touch their children. And everybody knows how important touch is for kids when children are developing. So we started a number of different programs. Some also, in a lot of institutions across the country, you can't visit your child unless there's a fee associated with that. And if you can't pay the fee, you can't visit. And this is all real true. The amount of money it costs to even talk on the telephone is astronomical. For some families can't afford those. There's a number of costs involved that people just are not aware of. I was shocked to find the number of institutions that are charging for parents to just do normal things with their kids in the institution. So you can't do normal things with your kids. So most inmates say, just don't come up here.
That's right.
And so they lose that contact with their children. They lose that sense of family with their children because they don't, one, have the money, or two, they don't want to face the embarrassment that it takes to be a part of your child's life. So children of incarcerated parents tend to suffer much more and have much higher stressors than kids under normal circumstances, even normal poor kids.
A lot of stuff is going through my head. The issue of not being able to see your parent. I was in a federal prison, first in California. The only reason why, because when I gave birth to my son, I was not able to touch, hold, smell, feel him after I gave birth to him until months after, when I was transferred to a federal prison. And the government transferred me to a federal prison out in California, and my family was in Virginia. So my mom begged me, because I was thinking, probably like some of the other women who are incarcerated, you know, I don't want to burden my family. And my mom was just begged me to please get transferred to a federal prison that's closer, and that only prison was in Danbury, Connecticut, because I was sentenced to over 15 years. When you're sentenced to over 15 years, you're considered a high security inmate. And so holidays, their money was going towards coming to visit mommy. And you spoke about the collect calls. My parents spent over $50,000 in collect calls for me to speak with my son. My parents had to file for bankruptcy twice. They had a tremendous support system. My gosh, the story was in national magazines. There were organizations there supporting. But I was considered that poster child because I came from a particular type family, and these organizations embrace that. I don't care what kind of family you come from, what happened shouldn't have happened. So I'm grateful for the support that my family received, but I'm saying that even through all of that, there were still collateral ripple effects to my family, where my son, we couldn't have, in federal prison they have a children's center, which was a little bit more sensitive because you could actually play games with your children and stuff like that. But I can remember when my son started talking over the phone system, he says, "Mommy, just jump the fence. Why don't you just jump the fence? I don't understand why you don't come home." And so I was like, "Son, please don't talk like that." But I think that I'm just trying to get people to understand the emotional of what goes through a child's mind. And I can remember my son, I saw a poster that he had done while I was incarcerated where, you know, kids in public school, they have to do a family tree. How does a young child present a family tree of his family, and that main person caretaker isn't even there? It's in federal prison. So there is this stigma where kids of incarcerated parents do not want to speak up about it. And there needs to be some conversation for that within the school systems. But just lastly, there is a young girl who is a child of an incarcerated parent. She's based out of DC now, but she started an organization called Scholarships that basically gives scholarships to children of formerly incarcerated parents. But it's a good network for the kids to come together so they can be open to speak about the various issues that they've endured.
Can you talk about some of the systemic problems within our criminal justice system? So Kimba, maybe talk about what you saw in the federal system in terms of what resources are available or what you see happening with people being charged with conspiracy, from peripheral roles in drug trafficking. And then Judge Alexander, if you can talk about some of the systemic problems that you see within the Hennepin County system, that would be great.
Well, the ACLU has labeled it the girlfriend problem, where I believe part of the reason why the fastest growing population within prison were black women, and especially because the majority of people in federal prison are drug offenders, there's this girlfriend problem where there are girls that get involved with these drug dealers, and I didn't know all the intricacies of the drug business. I wasn't out there holding the drugs, transporting the drugs, or selling the drugs. So when it comes time for, when they start rounding people up and pushing out charges, people are trying to free themselves. People are trying to look out for themselves. So there are people where the men, because they know more about the business, will cooperate and tell the ins and outs, and they get a more reduced, lenient sentence. Whereas the women that don't know anything end up getting a harsher sentence. So you will find that a lot of those life sentence women that are incarcerated, served over 23 years already, their partners are already at home. Within the jail, the prison system, systematically, they're mostly male correctional officers that are in there. And so I can personally remember coming out of a dining hall where they pat search you and frisk you. Shoot, at the airport, when you get pat searched, it's got to be a female person that does it. But I guess in federal prison, it doesn't matter. And so I can remember a correctional officer pointing the finger at me, telling me to come here because he wanted to pat me to make sure I wasn't stealing food from out of the dining hall. And so I stretch my arms and legs out, and he starts patting me inappropriately. And I can remember going back to my cell, throwing up, because I wanted to just spit in his face, honestly. And what are you doing to me? But I wanted to keep that perfect inmate, and I don't like using the word inmate because I think language is very important, that we should say person who is formerly incarcerated, but I wanted to keep that perfect inmate image so that if an opportunity happened for me to come home, that there wouldn't be an issue. But there's so many things going on with the prisons, with correctional officers sleeping with some of the women so the woman can get some lipstick or perfume or some kind of item that they wouldn't normally receive. I'm grateful that I was able to adjust, but there's some women that can't adjust to that oppressive setting. And so there were two women that I knew in California where their adjustment wasn't well. They ended up getting sent to the hole. The hole was filled in the federal prison there, so they would ship them to the local prison in California. I forgot what county it was. And there were very few women there at that jail. And so at night, the correctional officers were paid by some of the guys in the prison, where they would let the guys come into the women's cells and they were raping my two friends. And so actually the ACLU took on their case, and they were eventually compensated some kind of amount of money, but there are several systematic issues that need to be dealt with within the prison system.
When Nakima asked me to come here, she asked me to talk about state versus Russell, but also some other issues surrounding drug laws and drug sentences. I will say, however, in a lot of the research that I've done, it is not really a new phenomenon that people of color have been punished more severely for committing the same crimes as white Americans, and that can be traced back through history. But the first one that dealt with the distribution of cocaine was the Harrison Act of 1914. And that was our first federal law that prohibited the distribution of cocaine. And that came on the heels of media accounts that depicted cocaine being used by black people and black women who they said were prostitutes in the inner cities. And there were huge media accounts around that. All of it was inaccurate, but it was the way that it was depicted at the time which gave rise to that act. In later years, cocaine became associated with jazz musicians. Now we all know that jazz is Black America's only form of original music. That was, well, and gospel. And gospel.
Yeah.
But, and so many other stuff like that. And the penalties remained extremely severe. It wasn't until the early 1960s when cocaine was then associated with rich white men in Hollywood that it became, the penalties were then examined. Now, after I decided Russell in 1990, and I'm going to say that again, 1990. You guys, that was a long time ago. So I try to tell people, you know, I've been a judge for 32 years, and I've decided like a whole lot of cases, but everybody thinks I only did one. And it was in 1991 that it was affirmed by the Minnesota Supreme Court, and it did make our penalties in Minnesota equal. However, the county attorney at the time did not want to lower the penalty, so decided to raise the penalty for both of the types of drugs. So, and it's actually the same drug. However, we did institute in Hennepin County then our drug court, which I think has been highly successful in terms of adding treatment as an option rather than incarceration. So I think we've made some strides in that area. However, Charles Rangel actually in 1996 did put forth the first federal legislation to try to equalize the penalties between crack and powder cocaine. That was defeated, and then we tried to change the federal sentencing guidelines at that time as well. Unfortunately, even though I do give President Clinton props for commuting your sentence, he also did some not very good things. And had the opportunity to do some of the same things that President Obama has done now, some 20 years later. He could have done he could have done in 1996. And did not. He has since apologized, however, but that he did institute some very, very bad criminal justice policy. Some very bad policy that we're trying to get over right now. And hopefully, and actually Attorney General Holder really did a lot in that area. So I think all of us should owe a big debt of gratitude for him moving that policy in those policy discussions forward. I was very disappointed that President Clinton and then Attorney General Reno did nothing in this area, even when they knew it was racially skewed. And they knew it, it was clear. The ACLU actually did some phenomenal work in the early 90s on this, which was unbelievable. There was a young woman who worked with me by the name of Nakichi Taifa, who I believe, I don't remember where she was out of, but she was out of DC. She was fabulous. And she came here several times. She went all around the country trying to get this equality in sentencing done on the crack versus powder cocaine issue. She had me speaking all over the place. I was like, Nakichi, really, I've got to work. But she did just phenomenal research, presented it to the president many, many, many times, and nothing happened. So I actually am very, I feel real good about where President Obama is going, because no other president even had the guts to even talk about it, let alone make the changes that have been done. Now, there's also, for people who like to read, I'm going to give you a Harvard Law Review article that does talk about race in the criminal justice process, which I think is one of the best that's been written. It's I'm waiting for Nikema to write a better one, but this one's getting a little old, but it does give you a very good historical backdrop on racial discrimination, and it's at 101 Harvard Law Review 1472 for the students in the room. And so if you want to look that up, you can. And it's called Race in the Criminal Justice Process, and it's a very, it's a shorter read than some of the books that have been published. So I thought if you just want to see this and you're interested in the area of how race has played a role in the criminal justice process, it's a very good one to read. And I think we all need to understand our history, because if we don't know where we came from, we're bound to repeat it. And we can't repeat the same mistakes. I think that we are still bringing people in the criminal justice system in a very hugely disproportionate way. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of how we're policing our communities. I think we have areas of our city that are over-policed, and we need to really do something about that and bring that to the attention of many, many different people. And I know the NAACP is doing that. I think the criminal justice system has a long way to go. And, I've been fighting these things for a very, very long period of time. And y'all, I'm retiring in 2 years, so I'm gonna tell you that right now. Not only am I retiring, I'm actually moving. Wow. So, I know. But I'm gonna feel good because I'm leaving my sister here. But also, I think that this work needs to continue, needs to be on the forefront of everybody's mind. We have made some strides, but we have not gone nearly far enough.
Add to your comments or any specific reforms that you think we should be undertaking. I know, Kimber, you talked about the issue of felon disenfranchisement. That's an issue that many organizations have been fighting in the state of Minnesota, because if you are a person who is on probation, you cannot vote, a felon on probation. And we think that that's a travesty of justice, and the Minneapolis NAACP is going to join that fight in the next legislative session. So I'm going to give you about 1 minute to provide some concluding remarks.
Well, in closing, I just, again, am very humbled and grateful. I mean, here I am in between two powerhouses. And, I don't know why God puts me in these positions, but I am so grateful for it. And I did fail to mention that this year, the governor of Virginia appointed me to the Virginia Criminal Sentencing Commission. So, meeting of the year next week, and I remember my first meeting, I felt awkward, because I've been through this experience, and here I am in a room full of mostly white judges, prosecutors, a couple of defense attorneys, and so the thing that I'm grateful for is that I was able to sit at the table, and when the time came, I didn't have any problems opening my mouth and being that voice. So, any of us can do this. So just make sure that you're involved, you're making your voices heard on particular issues that affect you the most, that you're most passionate about. Oftentimes we have to speak out for people that are totally different from you. But if somebody doesn't do it, our people, our youth, are gonna continue to go downhill, and we can't continue to point the finger. I am a prime example that when something's not right, that things can change. So even though some of our youth are doing some things that are a little bit crazy, but I'm sure they have various reasons for why they're doing it that some people could not even possibly understand. But we need to make sure that these policies aren't disproportionately affecting us the most. And aren't intentionally racist and biased towards us as a people. And lastly, my big issue right now, because I know President Obama is going out of office, I want Michelle West to receive executive clemency. I want Danielle Metz to receive executive clemency. If you're interested in learning more about their cases and their stories, feel free to go to candoclemency.org. There's a petition that's on the White House government's website where there are other women who have life sentences that people are petitioning for their automatic release from President Obama. So please get involved in that movement, because and lastly, sorry, this is it. I know going across the news screens nationally, they keep talking about these 6,000 federal inmates that'll be released over federal prison over a certain time period, and they'll start being released today or tomorrow. And people think it's a big deal, and I'm grateful that the Senate signed it. Yes, that needed to be done, but it's something, if I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's something that should have been retroactive anyway. And the majority of the people coming out have already served tremendously long sentences, and their release date would have been soon anyway. But I know because one day in prison,
Come on.
I know they're grateful for it. But I don't want you all to be delusioned in thinking that, oh, we've made this, that should have been done a long time ago.
That's right.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. The legislation, we need to pay a lot of attention to what's being passed in the legislature. That when the 18-to-1 came into existence, one of the big parts of that legislation was to try to make it retroactive. They did not make it retroactive at the time that they went from 100-to-1 to 18-to-1. There was a lot of discussion about it, and everybody had this big outcry about, oh, you're going to let all these prisoners loose. But in actuality, the prisoners should have never been there in the first place. So just, really do keep that in mind when you see these media accounts of this, because had the sentences been equal to begin with, they would have never went to prison.
That's right.
They would have all gotten probation. So the difference is that some of that sentencing, and if we really feel in our hearts that it was unjust, then it should have been retroactive without even thinking about it. When we changed it in Minnesota to be equal, it was not retroactive either. So there were still people serving those sentences who got those prior to 1990, and it was not retroactively applied. So, and if you believe the Supreme Court and Justice Wall, who I believe, who actually got what I was trying to say, after that, if you really found that it was unconstitutional, then all of those people should have just been let out. But they weren't. Instead, people just decided to attack me. The other thing, I'm a big girl. So the other issue that I think that we need to be mindful of is that we have a number of people who are incarcerated coming through our system that have severe mental health issues, and we have to really look at that. Especially in the African American community, who does not like to talk about those issues. But there's a lot of mental health issues that need to be dealt with that are being overly ignored. And on the reentry tip, the other thing that we have to look at is all the collateral consequences, not just housing and jobs, but being able to live in public housing, being able to get student loans, being able to get loans at banks. There's some drug offenses, you can't get a loan at a bank if you have one. those things need to continuously be looked at so that people can actually transition back into society. And so there's a whole list of collateral consequences that people don't talk about or know, because every time the legislature meets, they like to say, well, oh gee, we just have to do this again to them, or we have to do that. And there's certain jobs you can't have if you have a felony drug conviction. And one of the ones I'd like to give is that you can't shovel manure at the racetrack because you can't be around any gay men. You can't work in any healthcare field, even if it's being a cook at a hospital. You can't have those jobs. So we need to take a look at that and try to figure out how we can roll those back as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give, thank you for sharing your valuable wisdom with